What if I told you that by this winter you could be crocheting your very own sweater? It might seem a little bit impossible to believe now because of all the different terminologies that are complicated on patterns and because of the fast-paced tutorial videos. But when you learn the basics, it's a lot more fun and a lot less stressful. After a little bit of practice, you'll be well on your way towards making that sweater. I have always wanted to learn how to crochet. I've been knitting since I was 13. And I have a sister-in-law who can crochet that has volunteered to teach me how to make a baby blanket for my brother who's expecting his baby. And I have spent a considerable amount of time researching the ins and outs of beginning to learn how to crochet, as well as the tools involved in the patterns. Today I want to talk about the 3 basic steps to learn how to begin to crochet. The first step is what crochet hook you'll be needing for your project. The second is knowing the differences in yarn gauge. And the third is understanding complicated abbreviations that might be used in patterns. Since there are so many different parts, I thought we could break it down each step and talk about them individually. The first step is knowing what crochet hook you'll need. To start, let's talk about what exactly a crochet hook is. It's important to note the difference between a knitting needle and a crochet hook. Roxana Coldiron, who's a freelance writer from marthastewart.com, wrote an article about knitting versus crocheting in 2019 and explains that knitting needles are pointy and often used in pairs, whereas a crochet hook is used singularly and has a hooked end. Next, it is helpful to know the anatomical terms for the hook. Important parts are the handle, grip, mouth, and tip. In 2021, offthebeatenhook.com described the handle as the part that you hold towards the bottom. The grip is where the label of the hook are in the thumb wrist, and the mouth is the actual hooked part that hooks the yarn, and the tip at the top gets inserted into the stitches. So to demonstrate this, I have a crochet hook here. And the bottom is the handle. There's a little notch right here, which is the grip where your thumb can rest, and it also has the description of the size. And then we have the mouth of the hook, which is right here, which actually grabs the yarn, and the tip at the very top, which is put through the stitches. The final piece of knowledge that is important for the hook is the difference in steel hooks versus regular hooks. First, let's talk about steel hooks, which are used for lighter weight yarn. Crochet365knit2.com wrote an article about hook sizes and the different types. The US version decreases as hook size goes up in the case of the steel hook. And the UK in this case is also the same, though the numerical values are different. Next, let's talk about the normal hooks, which are used for bulkier yarn. The US goes further down the alphabet as the hook gets bigger, and the UK is opposite, where the higher the number, the smaller the hook size actually is. Now that we know about the hook a little bit, let's talk about yarn gauge. The second step in learning to know how to knit how to crochet is the yarn gauge. You might be wondering what exactly yarn gauge is. According to Ashley Little on the Crafty blog, gauge is how many stitches per inch that you have. Make sure that you use the right amount of yarn so that you don't end up having to buy another ball of yarn, and it also helps your project to be the shape that you want, so it's not an oversized sweater. Next, let's talk about checking your yarn gauge. The best option is to make a gauge swatch, and the article entitled Understanding Crochet Gauge, written on hearthookhome.com, implies that you crochet a few rows and then you stitch a little bit extra than you normally would. And to measure, you go 4 inches sideways to get your stitch gauge, and then you measure 4 inches vertically to get your row gauge. Once your gauge swatch is done, you can adjust accordingly. And Ashley Little, whose article described why yarn gauge is so important in 2017, says that if there are too many stitches, then your project is going to be too small, and to adjust for this, you'll need a bigger hook. And if you have less stitches, you're going to run out of yarn, so you'll need a smaller hook to adjust for that. It's important to note that you are a beginner, so the tension in your hand will be different for every project at the beginning, so it's important to measure and see where you are at as a beginner. Now that we know more about hooks and yarn gauge, let's talk a little bit about those abbreviations that are commonly used in patterns. The final step in learning to begin to crochet is the abbreviations in patterns. One of the first abbreviations is CH or CHS, which is chains or chain. This refers to the loop that you make in the foundation or the beginning of your project. And before you chain, you'll have to learn how to do a slip knot, which is easily looked up on YouTube. After a slip knot, you'll hook the yarn, or yarn over as it's commonly called in patterns, where you just put the yarn over. and then you'll pull through the loop. The second abbreviation is SC, which stands for single crochet. And it's important to note for each pattern it's different how many chains you will be using. And there's also a turning chain every time you finish a row, and that chain does not count towards the count of your stitches. For a single crochet, you'll have a loop already on the hook, and you'll stick the tip of the hook through the chain and then yarn over and pull through both of the loops. The third final abbreviation is DC, which stands for double crochet and is very similar to single crochet. You'll have that same initial loop on the hook again, and before you stick the hook through the next stitch, you'll want to yarn over, then stick it through, then yarn over one more time, and only pull through 2 of the loops. Then you'll yarn over one more time, and then pull through the remaining loops. Now that we've learned about the ins and outs of beginning to crochet, let's review a little bit. I've talked about the 3 main steps in learning to begin to crochet. The first step is the crochet hook and what type you'll be needing and what you'll be using. The second is the differences in yarn gauge and how to measure those. And the third is the different abbreviations and some of the actions involved that are used in patterns. With the knowledge that you now have about crochet hooks, gauges, and abbreviations, I hope to be seeing those sweaters very soon.